The assignment came just before sunset, when the jungle was beginning to swallow the last of the light. Our reconnaissance team was ordered to slip across a quiet stretch of the Cambodian border and verify reports that a Khmer Rouge unit had been moving through the area. No one knew how many men they had or what they were planning. Our job wasn't to fight. It was to disappear into the jungle, find the truth, and come back without leaving so much as a footprint behind. I was 23 then, a scout with enough experience to know that silence could be louder than gunfire. There were 4 of us. Sergeant Hung led the team. He rarely spoke unless he had something worth saying. Years of reconnaissance had taught him patience, and patience kept men alive. Loy was the youngest among us, barely 20. He had an unusual gift for reading the ground. A bent blade of grass, a broken twig, a faint heel mark in damp soil. He could tell you who had passed through and how long ago. Then there was Ben, our navigator and radio operator. He carried a worn map folded so many times that the creases were nearly torn apart. He dreamed of becoming a schoolteacher after the war, and during quiet moments he would scribble notes about the villages we passed, saying he wanted to remember that people still lived normal lives somewhere beyond the fighting. Our packs were light but carefully prepared. Each man carried dried rice, a dented aluminum canteen, a hammock with a rain poncho tied around it, a compass, extra socks, and just enough ammunition to defend ourselves if there was absolutely no other choice. In reconnaissance, every ounce mattered. The heavier your pack, the slower your feet. The slower your feet, the greater the chance you never came home. The jungle welcomed us with its familiar smell of wet earth and decaying leaves. Moisture clung to every branch, every vine, every blade of elephant grass. Mosquitoes buzzed around our faces while distant birds called out one last time before darkness settled over the forest. We moved in single file, leaving several yards between each man, careful not to break branches or brush against thick bushes that might reveal our path. After nearly 2 hours of moving, Loy suddenly raised a clenched fist. We froze without making a sound. He knelt beside a narrow stream and pointed to the muddy bank. Fresh footprints. At first glance there were only 4 or 5 sets, but Loy slowly traced the impressions with his finger before shaking his head. More than that, he whispered so quietly I barely heard him. Some stepped where others already walked. A few yards farther, I noticed something else. The ashes of a small cooking fire were still warm beneath a thin layer of dirt. Whoever had camped there had buried the fire carefully before leaving. There were no empty food cans, no scraps of cloth, nothing careless. These weren't frightened civilians. They were disciplined soldiers who understood how to erase their tracks. Sergeant Hung crouched beside the fire without saying a word. His eyes moved slowly across the trees while Ben quietly marked the location on his map. None of us liked what we were seeing, but we still lacked enough evidence to understand the enemy's intentions. As we prepared to move again, a faint groove caught my attention. It cut through the damp soil, disappearing into the thicker jungle beyond the stream. Someone had dragged something long and heavy, leaving only a shallow scar in the earth before covering most of it with leaves. I stared into the darkness ahead. Whatever had been pulled into those woods, it was important enough for them to hide every other trace, but not enough to erase that single mark. That was the moment I realized our mission had just become far more dangerous than any of us had expected. We followed the drag mark into the trees, moving so slowly that a man watching from 10 yards away might have thought we were part of the jungle itself. Sergeant Hung went first, his rifle held low, his eyes never staying in one place for more than a second. Lloyd came behind him, bent slightly forward, reading the ground as if it were a page in a book. Ben stayed close to me, one hand on the map case, the other touching the compass tied to his chest with a piece of faded cord. The rain began before we had gone another 100 yards. At first it was only a soft tapping on the leaves above us. Then it turned heavy, thick, and steady. In the Cambodian jungle, Rain did not simply fall. It closed around you. It filled your ears, soaked your clothes, blurred your eyes, and washed away the small signs a scout depended on. A footprint that had been clear 1 minute became a dark puddle the next. A broken twig sank under mud. A scent disappeared. Loy stopped often, kneeling in the wet leaves, searching for anything the rain had not yet stolen. Once, he lifted a blade of grass and showed us a smear of fresh mud halfway up the stem. Someone had stepped there recently. Another time, he found a heel print under a low branch where the rain could not reach it. He looked back at Sergeant Hung and held up 8 fingers. 8 men at least. That changed everything. We had first guessed 4, maybe 5. A small group could be a patrol. 8 men moving quietly with something heavy meant a mission. Maybe supplies, maybe weapons, maybe something worse. None of us said that out loud. By then the forest was almost black. The rain made the night feel even deeper. We could hear frogs calling from flooded ground, insects screaming from the tree trunks, and somewhere far away, the short bark of a wild animal. My shirt clung to my skin. My canteen knocked softly against my hip until I wrapped it with a strip of cloth. That old canteen was dented on one side from a fall months earlier. But it still held water, and in those days that was enough to make it valuable. We moved for another hour. Maybe more. Time became hard to measure when every step had to be chosen before it was taken. Sergeant Hung kept us away from open ground and avoided dry branches. Ben checked the compass whenever the trees allowed him room to lift it. He made tiny marks on the edge of the map with a pencil stub, using his poncho to shield the paper from the rain. Then the drag mark disappeared. For several minutes we found nothing. No footprints, no bent grass, no broken bark. The jungle had swallowed the trail. Sergeant Hung crouched under a stand of bamboo and looked at each of us. His face was calm, but I knew what he was thinking. We could keep pushing forward and risk walking blind into an ambush. Or we could pull back and report what little we had. Loy was the one who found the next sign. He crawled almost flat under a fallen tree and waved us closer. There, half buried in wet leaves, was a thin piece of black wire. One end had been cut clean. The copper inside still looked bright, not yet dulled by weather. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. Sergeant Hung picked it up with 2 fingers, studied it, then laid it back exactly where it had been. We all understood at the same time. This was no ordinary trail. Someone had been laying wire in the jungle, and wire in a place like that usually meant one thing. A mine, maybe more than one. The rain kept falling around us, loud enough to hide footsteps, loud enough to hide a mistake. Sergeant Hung raised one hand and motioned for us to spread out. From that moment on, every inch of ground in front of us looked dangerous. At first, Sergeant Hung believed the wire might have been left behind by villagers or an old unit that had passed through months earlier. In that part of Cambodia, abandoned wire, rusted cans, torn cloth, and broken equipment could appear anywhere. War had a way of leaving its trash in the trees long after the men had moved on. He did not dismiss the danger, but he did not want us to jump to conclusions either. That was one of the hardest parts of reconnaissance. You were always walking between fear and judgment. If fear ruled you, every shadow became an enemy. If judgment failed you, one careless step could cost a man his legs. Or worse. Hung motioned for us to circle wide. We did not touch the wire again. We did not cut it. We did not pull it. We only marked the spot in our minds and moved around it. One man at a time, placing each boot exactly where the man ahead had stepped. The rain softened the ground beneath us. Mud gathered around our soles. Leeches clung to our socks. No one complained. In the jungle, complaining only wasted breath. After a while, the rain slowed to a whisper. Mist hung low between the trees, and the smell of wet earth became stronger. Ben unfolded the map beneath his poncho and checked our position with the compass. His hands were steady. but I could see his eyes moving faster than usual. He knew, just like the rest of us, that we were no longer tracking a simple movement route. We found the first covered hole near a cluster of young trees. Loy saw it before any of us. He stopped, lowered himself carefully, and pointed with 2 fingers. At first I saw only leaves. Then I noticed they were too evenly spread, too clean, too deliberate. The soil around them had been disturbed and pressed back down. A thin root had been cut and laid across the spot to make it look natural. Sergeant Hung's face changed then. Not much, but enough. He took a twig and gently moved one leaf aside. Beneath it was packed dirt, darker than the ground around it. He stopped immediately and did not dig deeper. He did not need to. We all understood. A mine. Maybe a pressure mine. Maybe something wired to explode from a distance. We could not know for sure without exposing it. And exposing it was not our mission. Our mission was to find out what the enemy was planning and get that information back alive. A few yards beyond it, we found another covered spot. Then another. My stomach tightened. The wire we had seen was not old. It was not harmless. It was part of a trap. For a moment, no one moved. The jungle around us seemed to grow quieter, though I knew it was only my own fear narrowing the world. I could hear water dripping from leaves. I could hear Ben breathing through his nose. Somewhere behind us, a branch cracked under its own weight and made all 4 of us turn at once. Sergeant Hung looked at me. I could see the regret in his eyes. His first judgment had been wrong. And in reconnaissance, a wrong judgment could follow you for the rest of your life. But he did not defend himself. He only nodded once, accepting the mistake, then pointed toward higher ground. We backed away the way we had come, stepping into our own prints. Every movement felt too loud. Every leaf seemed ready to betray us. From the ridge above, we finally saw what the lower trail had hidden from us. Fresh boot marks crossed the wet clay in several lines, all heading toward the border road used by Vietnamese patrols and supply columns. Some prints were deep, made by men carrying weight. Others were light and quick, likely scouts guarding the work. Lloyd counted silently, then looked at Hung. More than 8. The drag marks, the wire, the buried holes, the fresh tracks, everything pointed to a larger plan. The Pon Pot force was not just passing through. They were preparing a killing ground. As darkness settled again, Sergeant Hung pulled us close and whispered only one sentence. "We follow them until we know where the trap ends." No one answered. We all knew that from that moment on, one mistake would not just endanger our team. It could endanger every soldier who might come down that road after us. By dawn, we had reached a low rise covered with grass and thorny brush. From there, we could see a narrow clearing that ran between 2 walls of trees. It looked harmless at first, just another strip of wild land near the border. But after what we had found in the night, none of us trusted harmless-looking ground anymore. Sergeant Hung chose a place for us to hide beneath a thick patch of vines. We did not set up hammocks. We did not cook. We did not even loosen our boots. We lay flat under our ponchos, rifles close, faces turned toward the clearing. The rain had stopped, but the leaves were still dripping. Every few seconds, cold water fell onto the back of my neck and slid down my collar. I wanted to move, to wipe it away, but I stayed still. That was the life of a scout. You learn to let discomfort pass through you. Hunger, thirst, mosquitoes, cramps in your legs, the heavy smell of your own wet clothes. None of it mattered if moving meant being seen. Around mid-morning, the first man appeared. He came from the far side of the clearing, moving low, stopping often to listen. He wore dark clothes and carried a rifle across his chest. I could not see his face clearly, but the way he walked told me he knew the area. He was not lost. He was checking it. A second man followed, then a third. Loy, lying beside me, touched my sleeve once. That meant he had seen them too. Ben slowly pulled out his notebook and pencil. He wrote without lifting his head, using his body to shield the movement. Every mark he made might help our unit later. Number of men, direction of travel, time, distance, landmarks. Then we saw the bamboo stakes. One of the men took a short piece of bamboo from under his shirt and pushed it into the ground near the edge of the clearing. He did not drive it deep. He only pressed it in far enough that it stood at an angle, almost hidden by grass. Another man did the same about 20 paces away. They were marking something, but from where we lay, we could not tell what. Sergeant Hung watched through a small gap in the vines. His face gave away nothing. He had the patience of stone. I, on the other hand, felt my heart beating too hard. Part of me wanted to crawl closer, to see exactly what they were doing. But the open ground between us and them was too exposed. One careless movement, one flash of wet skin, one branch bending the wrong way, and we would lose everything. The men disappeared into the trees before noon. We stayed where we were. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, turning the wet jungle hot and sour. My mouth went dry, but I only allowed myself one small sip from my dented canteen. We had dried rice in our packs, but eating it made noise, and noise was something we could not afford. Ants crawled across my sleeve. A mosquito landed near my eye and drank until it was fat. I let it. Ben kept studying the map. Every so often, he would look at the clearing, then back at the paper. Finally, he leaned close to Hung and whispered, "Those markers line up with the patrol road." That sentence settled over us like a weight. The bamboo stakes were not random. They were reference points, maybe for mines, maybe for a firing position, maybe for men who would come at night and needed to know where to move in the dark. Late in the afternoon, more figures appeared at the far edge of the trees. This time they were carrying long sacks over their shoulders. The sacks sagged in the middle, heavy enough to make the men lean forward as they walked. Sergeant Hung lowered his binoculars and looked at each of us. No one needed him to say it. The trap was still being built, and we were watching it happen. By nightfall, the trap began to show its shape. The men with the long sacks did not move like a patrol. They did not spread out to search for us. They moved with purpose, stopping at the bamboo markers one by one. From our hiding place, we could not see every detail, but we saw enough. One man knelt in the grass while another stood guard with his rifle facing the tree line. A third man pulled something from a sack and handed it down carefully, both hands under the weight. Sergeant Hung watched without blinking. Loy lay beside him, lips pressed tight, counting every movement. Ben wrote in his little notebook until the pencil point broke. He did not curse. He simply turned the pencil, used the sharper edge of the broken wood, and kept writing. The Pon Pot soldiers worked in silence. That worried me more than shouting would have. Men who talked too much in the jungle were usually nervous. These men were not nervous. They knew exactly what they had come to do. After a while, the pattern became clear. The bamboo stakes marked the edges of a killing zone. The buried mines we had found earlier were not scattered at random. They were placed along the route where our patrols and supply columns usually slowed down before entering a narrow bend in the road. A truck, a stretcher team, even a squad moving on foot would naturally bunch up there. That was what the enemy wanted. It was not a battle plan. It was a trap designed to take lives before anyone even saw a rifle barrel. The realization sat heavy in my chest. I had seen men die before. Any soldier who spent time in Cambodia had seen enough to last 10 lifetimes. But there was something different about watching death being prepared step by step. Quietly, patiently, like men building a fence or digging a well. No anger on their faces. No shouting. Just hands placing explosives into wet earth, covering them with leaves, then smoothing the ground as if nothing had happened. We could not stop them right there. That was the hardest truth. There were too many of them, and we did not know if more were hidden nearby. If we opened fire, we might kill a few. But we would reveal ourselves and lose the chance to warn the unit. Worse, they might set off part of the trap or escape with the rest of the plan still hidden. A scout's pride always whispers that he can do more than watch. But a scout who forgets his mission can get many men killed. So we watched. The hours crawled. My legs cramped under me. My stomach burned from hunger. The dried rice in my pack felt like a stone I could not touch. My canteen was nearly half empty, and I knew we still had a long way back. The air smelled of damp grass, mud, sweat, and something metallic I could not name. Near midnight, the group changed direction. 2 men remained by the marked road. The others moved deeper into the forest, toward a second line of bamboo stakes we had not noticed before. Ben lifted his head slightly, following them with his eyes. Then he looked down at the map and tapped a spot with his finger. That second line pointed toward the trail used by our medical and ammunition carriers. Sergeant Hung's jaw tightened. 1 trap could have been meant for a patrol. 2 traps meant something larger. The Pon Pot unit was not simply trying to wound a few soldiers. They were trying to cut movement along the border, force our men into confusion, and maybe draw a rescue column into another minefield. For the first time that night, I felt truly cold. Ben leaned toward me to pass the map, and that was when I noticed his hand shaking. At first I thought it was fear. Then I saw the sweat running down his face, even though the night air had cooled. His eyes looked glassy. He whispered, "I'm fine." But I knew that look. We all did. The fever had found him. Ben tried to hide the fever, but a scout learns to read more than footprints. His breathing had changed. His fingers shook when he folded the map. Every few minutes, his jaw tightened as if he were biting down on pain. The jungle could fool a man from a distance, but not when he was lying shoulder to shoulder with you in the dark. Sergeant Hung noticed it too. He crawled close without making a sound and touched the back of his hand to Ben's neck. Even in the night air, I could see the answer in his face. Ben was burning up. Malaria had been following us for months like an enemy that never needed a rifle. Some men were hit by bullets. Some were taken down by fever, shaking so hard their teeth sounded like stones in a tin cup. Ben whispered, "I can still move." No one believed him. His radio was wrapped in oilcloth beside him. The map and notes were in his breast pocket, damp but readable. Those notes were the heart of our mission now. They marked the bamboo stakes, the mine positions we had seen, the second trail, and the direction of the Pon Pot team. If those notes reached our unit in time, men would live. If they did not, a patrol or supply group might walk straight into the killing zone by morning. Sergeant Hung looked toward the dark trees where the enemy had disappeared, then back toward the route we had taken in. He did not speak for a long moment. I knew the decision was tearing at him. A leader could not carry every man and every mission at the same time. War often forced you to choose, and then made you live with the choice. Finally, he pointed to himself and Loy, then toward the rear. He and Loy would try to slip back with the map copy and report the trap. I would stay with Ben until he could move or until they returned with help. It was the only way. 4 men moving together with 1 sick man would be too slow. 2 healthy scouts had a chance to get through. Ben shook his head weakly. "Take the radio. Leave me here." I still remember how angry I felt when he said that. Not loud anger. There was no room for loudness. It was the kind that burns quietly in your chest. Ben was 22 years old. He wanted to teach children after the war. He used to say he would draw maps on a school board instead of carrying them through the jungle. And there he was, lying in wet leaves, offering to be left behind like a broken pack. Sergeant Hung leaned close to him and whispered, "Nobody is being left." Then he looked at me. "Keep him quiet. Keep him hidden. If you must move, move north toward the dry creek bed. Do not fire unless there is no other way." I nodded. There was nothing heroic about that moment. No music, no speeches, No grand feeling. Just four tired men in the mud, sharing a few mouthfuls of water and a handful of dried rice that tasted like dust. Hung gave me his extra quinine tablets. Lloyd took off one of his dry socks and wrapped it around Ben's radio battery to keep it from knocking against the case. Before leaving, Lloyd squeezed Ben's shoulder. He tried to smile, but it failed halfway. "Teacher," he whispered, "don't die before you teach me how to write better." Ben's lips moved, but no sound came out. Then Hung and Lloyd slipped into the trees, one shadow after another, and the jungle closed behind them. I lay beside Ben with my rifle across my arms, listening to his fevered breathing and the wet night around us. Minutes passed. Then, from somewhere ahead, I heard footsteps. Slow, careful, coming closer. The footsteps stopped so close that I could hear the wet grass bend under the man's weight. I pressed myself lower into the mud and placed one hand gently over Ben's mouth. Not hard, not to hurt him, only enough to remind him that silence was now the only thing keeping us alive. His skin was hot against my palm. His breath came in short bursts through his nose, and every breath sounded too loud to me. The night around us was full of noise, insects, frogs, dripping leaves, the distant rush of water in the creek bed. But when fear takes hold, the smallest human sound becomes a gunshot in your ears. I could hear my own heartbeat. I could hear Ben swallowing. I could hear the enemy shifting his rifle from one hand to the other. A flashlight beam cut through the trees. It did not shine directly on us, but it passed close enough that I saw the pale edge of a leaf glow beside my face. I had covered Ben and myself with damp leaves earlier, then pulled a strip of poncho over our packs to break up their shape. It was not perfect camouflage. Nothing ever is when you are working in darkness with shaking hands. But in that moment, it was all we had. The man took 2 more steps. I could see his legs now through the grass. Thin, dark pants, mud on his calves, sandals cut from old rubber. He was not more than 10 feet away, maybe less. If he looked down carefully, he might see the curve of my shoulder under the leaves. Ben trembled. The fever was working through him in waves. His body wanted to cough, wanted to shiver, wanted to fight the sickness. I leaned close to his ear and breathed the quietest words I could. "Hold it, brother. Just hold it." His eyes were open, wide and shining in the dark. The flashlight moved again. This time it touched the base of a tree beyond us. The man muttered something to another soldier farther back. I could not understand every word, but I caught enough to know they were checking the area. Maybe they had heard Hung and Loy moving away. Maybe they were simply cautious. Either way, they were searching. I thought of the map in Ben's pocket. I thought of Sergeant Hung and Loy trying to get through the jungle with a copy of the information. I thought of the patrol road and the hidden mines waiting under leaves. Somewhere behind us, men who knew nothing about this trap might already be preparing to move at first light. A scout is trained to stay still, but no training can quiet the part of you that wants to grab your rifle and solve the danger in front of you. My finger rested beside the trigger guard. One burst from my AK might drop the man standing over us. It might also bring every Pon Pot soldier in the area crashing down on us. It would save one moment and destroy the mission. So I did nothing. That was the hardest thing I did that night. The man bent slightly, looking at the ground. His flashlight lowered. The beam slid across the leaves covering my boot. I stopped breathing. Ben stopped breathing too. Then, from somewhere off to our left, a branch snapped. The man's head turned at once. He raised his rifle and moved toward the sound. Another figure followed him, whispering sharply. Their footsteps faded into the brush. I did not move for several minutes after they were gone. I kept my hand over Ben's mouth until his eyes softened and he gave the smallest nod. Only then did I let go. His whole body shook. I pulled the poncho tighter over him and checked the radio. Still safe, still dry enough. The notes were still in his pocket. But the danger had not passed. A few minutes later, the same footsteps returned from a different direction. Slower this time, more suspicious. The man had not left. He was circling back. When I heard the man circling back, I knew staying still might no longer be enough. He was not walking like someone returning to camp. He was moving slowly, testing the ground, stopping after every few steps. A careless man searches with his eyes. A careful man searches with his ears. This one was careful. He had felt something wrong in the dark, and now he was coming back to prove it. Ben lay beside me under the damp leaves, shaking harder than before. His fever had risen, even with my hand on his shoulder. I could feel the tremors running through him. I leaned close and whispered, "When I move, you crawl toward the creek bed. Slow, no sound." He tried to shake his head. I squeezed his arm once, not as an order, as a promise. The footsteps came closer. I could see the faint shape of the soldier between the trees. His rifle was up now. The flashlight was off, which worried me more. He was letting the darkness work for him. I had a choice to make. If I fired my AK, I might save Ben for a few seconds. But the whole jungle would wake up. The Pon Pot unit would know scouts were nearby. They might move the mines, change the plan, or chase Hung and Loy before they reached our lines. The warning might never get through. Men on the patrol road could still die. But if I did nothing, that soldier might step right onto us. I took a small stone from the mud beside my hand. It was no bigger than a thumb. I waited until the man paused, then tossed it low and sideways into the brush to our left. Not far, not hard, just enough to make it sound like a small animal moving through wet leaves. The soldier froze. Then he turned toward the sound. I tapped Ben twice. "Move." He began to crawl, inch by inch. His elbows sank into the mud. His radio dragged softly under his chest, and I reached out just in time to lift the strap before it caught on a root. He moved like a wounded animal, slow but determined. I wanted to help him, but I could not. If I moved too soon, both of us were finished. The soldier took 3 steps toward the brush where the stone had landed. Then he stopped again. He knew. Maybe the sound had been too neat. Maybe he saw a leaf move behind him. Maybe war had made him suspicious of everything, just as it had made us. He turned back suddenly, and for one terrible second his body faced directly toward me. I raised my rifle. My finger touched the trigger. That was the closest I came that night to breaking the mission. In my mind, I saw Ben as a teacher in a clean shirt, standing in front of children with chalk dust on his fingers. I saw the patrol road at dawn. I saw trucks packed with rice, medicine, and ammunition slowing at the bend. I saw men who would never know our names if we saved them, and never know why they died if we failed. The soldier took another step. Then, from deeper in the jungle, came a sound so soft most men would have missed it. A night bird call. Once, then twice. It was Sergeant Hung's signal. He was back nearby. I lowered the rifle a fraction. The enemy soldier heard something too, but he could not place it. He turned his head, uncertain. In that brief hesitation, I slid backward, one elbow at a time, keeping the muzzle low and my body under the leaves. Another faint bird call came from the north. That meant the creek bed was clear. I reached Ben just as he was losing strength. His eyes were half closed, his lips pale. I hooked one arm under his chest and dragged him the last few yards into a shallow dip behind a fallen log. He tried to speak, but I pressed a finger to my lips. The soldier moved again behind us, faster now. Then a second noise broke from the opposite side of the trees, a deliberate rustle, made by someone who knew exactly how much sound to give. The enemy turned toward it and moved away from us. Hung had drawn him off. I lay there with Ben in the mud, too afraid to feel relief. War teaches you that relief can be dangerous if it comes too early. I could still hear the soldier moving. I could still hear Ben fighting his fever. And somewhere beyond the trees, our team leader was risking himself so the warning could live. That night, I understood something I had not understood before. Sometimes courage is not charging forward. Sometimes it is staying silent while another man carries the danger away from you. Hung did not come back to us right away. He kept the enemy's attention on the far side of the trees, giving us just enough room to move. I never saw exactly how he did it. That was Hung's way. He could make a branch speak, make a shadow look like a man, and make the jungle hide him as if it had known him all his life. I pulled Ben deeper toward the dry creek bed, one slow yard at a time. His fever made him heavy in a strange way, not like a wounded man who fights to help you, but like someone drifting in and out of the world. Twice he tried to stand. Twice his knees folded. I had to clamp my hand over his mouth when a cough rose in his chest. By then, the first gray light was beginning to thin the dark. That worried me. Darkness had protected us, but dawn would expose every shape. The leaves covering our uniforms would no longer be enough. If the Pon Pot team swept the area in daylight, they would find us, and all the patience of the night would mean nothing. Then, from the north, I heard the soft call again. This time it came from closer. Loy appeared first, sliding down the creek bank on his stomach, mud on his face and blood on one sleeve. For a second I thought he had been badly hit, but he shook his head before I could ask. A thorn had cut him during the crawl back. Nothing more. Behind him came two men from our side, both engineers, carrying mine probes wrapped in cloth so they would not clink. Hung had made it through. Loy had made it through. The warning had reached our unit. I cannot describe the relief I felt, because relief in war is never clean. It comes mixed with fear, exhaustion, and the knowledge that the danger is not finished yet. The engineers did not rush. That was the first thing I noticed. They listened to our report, checked Ben's notes, and then moved toward the marked ground as carefully as surgeons. Every bamboo stake, every bend in the trail, every patch of disturbed earth had to be treated as if death was waiting under it. We stayed hidden while they worked. The patrol road had already been closed. A supply column carrying rice, medicine, and ammunition had been stopped before it reached the bend. Later, I learned that some of those men had cursed when they were ordered to halt. They did not know why they were being delayed. They did not know 4 muddy scouts had spent the night watching the road that might have killed them. One by one, the traps revealed themselves. A mine under leaves near the first marker. Another wired into the grass beside the road. A third hidden where a man would naturally step while helping someone wounded from the first blast. That detail stayed with me. The enemy had planned not just for the first explosion, but for the rescue afterward. War can make men clever in the cruelest ways. No big battle followed, no charge, no loud victory. The Pon Pot team realized something had changed when our patrols did not come down the road. They withdrew before noon, leaving behind what they could not carry. A few shots were heard far off. Then nothing but jungle again. Ben was carried back on a poncho tied between 2 poles. He was barely conscious. Even then, his hand kept closing around the pocket where his notebook had been. I walked beside him, holding his radio, afraid that if I let go of something, I would fall apart. At the edge of the cleared road, I saw the mines laid out after they had been disarmed. Muddy, ugly, ordinary-looking things, small enough to fit under leaves, strong enough to tear a man apart. Loy stood beside me, his cut arm wrapped in a dirty bandage. He whispered, "A few more hours." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. We all looked at the road, at the empty bend, at the place where our comrades would have slowed down without knowing death was waiting under the grass. That was the moment I understood that a reconnaissance mission did not need medals or headlines to matter. Sometimes saving lives meant crawling through mud, staying silent, and arriving just before the worst could happen. We pulled out of that border area 3 days later. By then, Ben's fever had gone down, but he still looked like a man who had left part of himself in the jungle. His cheeks were hollow, his lips were cracked. When he tried to stand, his legs shook so badly that Loy had to hold him by the elbow. Still, the first thing Ben asked for was not water or food. He asked for his notebook. Sergeant Hung handed it to him without a word. Ben opened it with both hands, as if it were something breakable. The pages were damp and stained with mud, but the pencil marks were still there. The bamboo stakes, the mine line, the second trail, the patrol road, the creek bed where we had nearly been found. He looked at those marks for a long time. Then he closed the notebook and pressed it against his chest. No one cheered when the mission ended. Men who have been close to death usually do not celebrate right away. We sat under a torn rain poncho, eating dried rice softened with a few drops of water. Too tired to talk. My dented canteen was almost empty. My uniform smelled of mud, sweat, and smoke from fires we had not dared to make. Leeches had left dark spots around my ankles. Loy's arm was wrapped in a dirty bandage, and Hung's eyes were red from staying awake too long. But the road was safe. That was enough. A week later, we were reassigned. Reconnaissance teams rarely stayed together forever. The war kept pulling men in different directions. Hung went to another sector near the border. Loy joined a team that specialized in tracking movement through flooded forest. Ben was sent back for treatment, and I did not see him again for a long time. Before he left, he pressed something into my hand. It was his old compass. The glass was scratched, and the brass edge was worn smooth from years of being rubbed against cloth and skin. A thin cord was tied through the loop. I told him he needed it more than I did. He shook his head. "You remember the way better than I do," he said. "Keep it. I still have that compass now. I am an old man, and my hands are no longer steady. Sometimes, when it rains at night, I take it out of the drawer and hold it in my palm. The needle still moves, though not as sharply as it once did. When I look at it, I do not think of victory. I do not think of medals, reports, or maps spread across a command table. I think of wet leaves over my face. I think of Ben trying not to cough while fever burned through him. I think of Loy counting footprints in the dark. I think of Sergeant Hung making a soft bird call from somewhere beyond the trees, risking his life so the rest of us could live. War did not make us stronger in the clean way people sometimes imagine. It took things from us: sleep, youth, ease, the simple belief that morning would always come safely. Even after the guns went quiet, the jungle stayed inside us in ways we could not explain. But it also left me with one truth I have carried all these years. A soldier does not survive alone. On that deadly night near the Cambodian border, we stopped a pond pot trap before it could take our men. But what I remember most is not the mines. It is the hands that pulled, covered, guided, and refused to let go. That compass no longer points only north for me. It points back to them.